it's Alice, and today we are gonna take a look at some of my recent reads and everything I read in the past month. Before we get into it though, you know what's funny? I always end up, like when I'm doing my wrap up or anything that happens in like the second month of the year, I always avoid using the name of the month because I have such a hard time pronouncing it. I don't know what it is, but like the word February, I think. There's something about it that just like, it just makes my tongue curl up and I have such a hard time with it. Maybe it's just me, but I always just like, whenever I film like my wrap up from February or however you're supposed to say it, I always say it in a different way. Although now I've said the word probably wrong like 8 times, so you're welcome. Anyways, first up, I finished the book Spare by Prince Harry, which is a nonfiction book. It's a memoir, which I'm sure you're all aware of. And the story is basically just about his life and what it's been like for him to be born into the family that he was born into and into the circumstances that he was born into, and just what that whole thing has been like for him. I listened to this on audiobook, which you might know that I don't listen to a lot of audiobooks, but I do try them every once in a while. And I wanted to just try it in audiobook form because Prince Harry reads it himself. And I feel like it was a good way to go about it because, to be totally honest, I don't know if I would have finished this if I had read it in the physical form, which I will try to explain why. But I think the audiobook like added something, like having him read it and hearing his voice definitely like added to the experience. Now, I mentioned in a video that I did at the beginning of the year, I think it was like a TBR or something, that I wanted to read this book because I wanted to form my own opinion on it, because a lot of people were talking about it and people still talk about it, and I just wanted to like read it to form my own opinion. But the thing is, I sort of realized like halfway through the book that I'm just not that interested in it. I think maybe I got a little bit caught up in the hype, and when I was reading it, and it is a little, I think the audiobook is like 13 hours or something, so it does take a little while to listen to. And I think at some point during that, I just realized that this isn't really one of my fields of interest. I did have parts of this that I really liked though, and don't get me wrong, there is nothing wrong with this book. It just didn't quite hit me. But I think some of my favorite parts were about his mom. I think the way that he talks about his mom and how he feels about that, a lot of that is really impactful, so I really like that. And then there is something interesting in like sort of feeling like you get to peek behind the curtain of a place that no one like is supposed to see, and that is very like tightly locked down. So there is something interesting in like getting an insider's perspective into that. I kind of feel though, and I don't know if this is just me, but I feel like a lot of what was in this book is already kind of known. And I don't know if I just pieced it together by like watching documentaries and things like that, but in my mind, when I was reading this, I was like, surely everyone agrees that like the paparazzi is like overall not great, and there's a really inhumane like aspect of it. But I guess he talks about the paparazzi a lot, and that's been like a huge part of his life. And clearly, based on what he writes, not everyone agrees with that. But to me, it's just like so obvious. And I don't know. I think I have some opinions on like royal families in general and like celebrity, and it didn't bring any like big revelations to me really, and I maybe thought that there was going to be more revelations in this book. And then I think there is like an element to it where I have no connection to the English royal family, and so there is like a limit to how much I really am that interested in it. I also feel like there are parts of this that dances around a lot of things, and I was a little bit surprised by how much it did that. And I think that affected my sort of impression of it. And I get why it's like that. Like, I totally get it. And I understand why this book was published and why he felt the need to like tell his story. I totally get it. I was just less interested in it than I thought I was going to be. And like I mentioned, it's not a bad book at all. It just wasn't for me. It is a little bit difficult to rate because of that, because I don't think there's anything wrong with the book. I think there's something wrong with the audience that chose to read it. So, yeah, difficult book to rate, but maybe like a 3 out of 5 stars. It feels weird to like rate it anything other than that, or maybe I should just like not rate it at all. Also, just a side note, I know that a lot of people have a lot of strong feelings about that book and a lot of strong feelings about what's going on and that whole institution and all of that, and there are a lot of feelings around it. Just remember that I'm totally like, I'm an outsider. I don't live in England. I've never lived there. I'm just, you know, an outsider in that kind of way, and so please do not come for me. Next, we have got 3 books that I read for a reading vlog all about exploring the genre that is cozy fantasy, and I loved making that vlog. It was definitely a success, I feel. And the first book that I read for that was Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree, and this is basically a story about an orc who wants to bring coffee to this town that has never heard of it. And she opens up a coffee shop and she brings together this team that works there, and they basically just run this coffee shop. I absolutely loved this book, and it was exactly what I wanted it to be. It was cozy and charming and just delightful, and it was filled with so many wonderful things, and I just, like, from the first chapter, I was in love with it. I was surprised by how invested I got in the characters. Like, I just loved the characters, and I really, really cared about what was happening to them. I really like the main character, but I also love the character that she sort of teams up with. And then there's this side character that I am obsessed with. It is this rat baker, and when I tell you that I would die for him and his cinnamon buns, like, my god. Obviously, this is quite a simple story in a lot of ways. Like, it really is just about this creature building this coffee shop and trying to get it up and running, and her being worried that her dream isn't gonna work out. But there is also like some parts where it got kind of rough, and it's the kind of book where you sort of figure that everything is gonna work out, but for a minute there I was a little bit worried that I was gonna have to like suffer some serious heartbreak. This is definitely a kind of like slice of life type of situation, and I think this is one of those books that you kind of just have to take it for what it is, and for me it was just perfect. My enjoyment level of this book was so high, and although I love reading, it is fairly rare for me to find a book that I'm like desperately wanting to pick back up. So much so that like with this, I left work early one day to just like go home and read because it's all I wanted to do. And so like I just loved it so much. And with those kinds of books, I just have to give them 5 stars because it's kind of rare for me to find those books. And those books can come in all kinds of different forms. Like sometimes it's really serious books, and then sometimes it's books like these where it's just charming, cozy, and you just love reading it. And there are all kinds of different reasons why you would love a book. But yeah, I had to give this 5 stars. I feel like it was a very, very good sort of introduction to the genre of cozy fantasy. Like, it couldn't have gone better. Then I picked up The House Witch by an author whose name I'm not totally sure how I'm supposed to pronounce. I'm pretty sure this is a pseudonym, but I would say Delamhach or Delamhach. I don't know. But I read this book and the story is about this cook who starts a position as the royal cook for the king and queen of this land, and he gets there and he rubs everyone the wrong way. He's kind of rude and he just wants things done his way, and he sort of gets off on the wrong foot with a lot of people, but everyone loves his cooking. Like, he can cook like no one else. And as we progress through the story, he starts like finding a home there and making friends, and he realizes that maybe the secret that he is trying to keep from everyone doesn't need to be kept after all. This was also a delightful reading experience, and again, it was the kind of book that I was looking forward to picking back up. There is more going on in this book, and it probably has like more meat to the story than maybe Legends and Lattes. So we have like magic, political intrigue. It appears that a war is about to break out, and there's like a spy in the castle, and there's a little bit of romance as well. So there's a lot more going on. I really loved the world that's built in here, and I love like the bustling life of the castle, and I really like our main character, who starts off being kind of rude, and he maybe appears a little bit inconsiderate, but throughout the book he really finds a home for himself here, and deep inside he really is just like a marshmallow. There's a lot of cozy cooking in here as well, especially at the beginning of the book, which I absolutely loved. And then there's this little frisky cat familiar that is running around the castle and has its own kind of life, and there's some stuff with that. And again, it is kind of like a slice of life type of story, but there is more exciting stuff going on, I would say. And I was very much just super invested in this, and I couldn't wait to keep reading. There are a couple of little things though with like the writing and stuff that I just noticed. Like, my enjoyment level of this was so high that it didn't bother me and I was super invested, but I did like notice it as I went along. I think maybe this book could have done with like just like one more rounds of edits, because there are a couple of things where I feel like it was just missed in the editing process of this, and if you had another round of it, I think it would have been so close to perfect when it came to like the writing, and it didn't pull me out of the story, but I did notice that it was there. I do also think this is slightly a little bit too long, and I think that it's the kind of book that leaves a lot of threads loose, and maybe a little bit too many of them. But you know, it is the first book in a series, and I think maybe it's the author's first book as well. And the second book is already out, which I'm very happy about, because I'm very curious as to what's gonna happen in the next book. And yeah, I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. Like, my enjoyment level was through the roof, but there are like a couple of things that just like keep me from giving it 5 stars, but really, really enjoyed it, and really, really looking forward to the second book, which I have already ordered, and I hope that it gets here soon. Second to last, we have got this super cute book called The Tea Dragon Society by Kay O'Neill, and this is just a very sweet graphic novel about this girl who starts learning about how to take care of tea dragons, who are dragons that can make like special kinds of tea. This was just very sweet, but also quite short, and so I don't really have that much to say about it, if I'm honest. I think my favorite part of this was definitely the art. I really, really like how the characters are drawn, and I think that the color palettes are just to die for. And it follows like all the 4 seasons, so I guess it's set over an entire year, and the different seasons like follow different color palettes, and I think the art is like really, really good. The story is very simple and quite short, and for me personally, I would have probably preferred to have like a little bit more to it, but I also realized that this is probably meant for a younger audience than me. What I really liked about this though is that in the back there's like quite a lot of information about the tea dragons and like everything about them, and there are different types of them here, which I really liked. And if I'm totally honest, I probably liked this part more than I liked the actual story. I think I would have liked more of this to have been in the story, and for this to have been like a little bit longer. But again, I think it's meant for slightly younger people, so I do also understand why it is the way it is. It is very, very sweet though, and I think I'll revisit this if I like need a pick-me-up one day. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars, and I think it's a very good use of 20 minutes if you have them and you like looking at pretty things and you like small and cozy dragons. Lastly, I read The Great Gatsby, the graphic novel, which I feel like is pretty self-explanatory as it is a graphic novel adaptation of the book The Great Gatsby. I read The Great Gatsby some years ago now, and I absolutely loved it, and it was fun to sort of revisit the story in a different kind of format. I think the art in here is cool, even though it's not like my favorite type of art, I would say, but it does some really cool things. Like there are some full page spreads and stuff that do some interesting things, so I think it fits the story really well. An interesting thing about this book though is that there is a note in the beginning of the book that mentions how difficult it is to adapt The Great Gatsby into other formats, and this format in particular. And the reason for it is that one of the major things of The Great Gatsby is the writing and the language, and you don't really get that in here. And I think it's interesting that the book comments on it, and it's definitely like a thing. Like you can really tell that that part of the book is not there. I have no idea how else this could have been adapted so that you sort of get some of that writing and what that brings to the story, but I definitely felt the loss of it. It feels very stripped down, and I think one of the reasons that I was able to enjoy this as much as I did was because I have read the novel, and so I sort of had it in the back of my mind filling in the blanks, if you will. I don't know how you would fare with this if this is your first introduction to the story. I don't know if you would really get the magic of it in a way, and yeah, it was interesting to read, and I think a lot of the reasons why I liked reading it was because I'd already read the novel and loved the novel. I think you sort of get the bones of the story with this, with some art and not much else. Like I think a lot of the magic of The Great Gatsby has disappeared in this in a way, because a lot of it is the writing and the way it's written and like the inner dialogue of the perspective of the person that we see the story from. I think some of it is lost in here. Like I mentioned, I was able to enjoy it because I'd already read the novel and I'd already felt the magic of reading the novel. So yeah, I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. I would maybe recommend it if you have read the novel and really like the novel and the story, but I also feel like you could just reread The Great Gatsby because it is quite short, and then you get all of that amazing stuff that you get with the writing as well. Okay everyone, those are all the books that I read in February or however you want to say it. And I would love to know if any of you have read any of the books and what you thought, or you could just tell me about what you have been reading lately. I would love to hear about it. As always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!